Welcome on to the first episode of Down for the brand new year. We've had a wee break over the festive season. We've survived the silly season. That was the last one we spoke about here on the podcast. My name is Brad Nadalt. I've got the coach with me, Lindsay Parry. Lindsay, all the best for 2025 into the brand new year. I've just been seeing it in my local running groups and the folks that I run with. The panicking starting already. It's January and people are going, oh, Comrades is coming, but now's not the time to panic. That's only later, and we'll tell you when you should be panicking. But did you have a great break?
Yeah, it was awesome. It's as I say, it's a new year, new you. So hopefully that's the same for everyone listening. But yeah, I feel mentally fresh. I feel like I need a little bit of recovery from the holiday on the physical front. But yeah, very excited to be back. Very excited to be back at work and looking forward to another glorious build-up to the 2025 Comrades.
Yeah, and you're struggling with the same sort of stuff that I do, that as we get older, the hamstring fairy seems to arrive and shorten our hamstrings overnight. So those are some of the problems we're dealing with physically at the moment. But everything else seems to be hunky-dory. In today's episode of Down, we're going to be just talking about the sort of overall look and feel of what we should be focusing on over the next 6 months in the build-up, or just under 6 months, in the build-up to Comrades 2025. We're also going to be talking about how to ramp up your mileage, because it's all good and well to get excited that January's here and it's now time to really kick off our Comrades training. But the last thing you want to do is just go hell for leather and mess things up before you've actually even started. So that's what we're going to be covering in today's podcast. Lindsay, let's dive straight into the sort of big picture thinking of how we should approach this thing between now and Comrades Race Day.
Yeah, Brad, that is always so important, because we also need to plan what events we want to do in the build-up. And that's, you're talking about panic, but that's all over the place. People panicking to try and get 2 Oceans entries, trying to get entries for qualifying races that have sold out. So it's important to just take a look back and go, right, what do we want to achieve in the phases of the training, so that you can figure out exactly what races to do, when to do them, and when to push, when to hold back through this whole training cycle. So as always, when we're talking about Comrades, we typically talk about people that have qualified and people that haven't qualified. And so the people who did qualify towards the back end of last year are essentially in the driving seats, because they can go to Plan A, which is focusing solely on Comrades and what does that mean in the build-up. And then the second group of people that need to qualify. And what I just want to say briefly now, and we will kind of repeat this as we go along and dig into a little bit more detail later, is that you do want to qualify as early as you can, but the most important thing is to qualify when you're ready. Okay, if you try and qualify early for the sake of qualifying early, you pick up an injury or you don't qualify, that means that you have to do another qualifying effort. So the most important thing, qualify when you're ready. Okay. So let's talk about the high road first. You've qualified. You've hopefully had a reasonably good December in terms of getting a nice balance between not doing too much, but doing something, as we discussed, getting through the festive season. And now you're going to start training. So we're going to talk in detail about what that means for now. But just to keep that in the bigger picture, is that we're going to spend the next 2 months, essentially the rest of January and February, just slowly building up. Then we're going to go through a phase where we're going to work on your strength on the hills. We're going to build in some strength training. We're really going to start shooting up that mileage from March so that we can hit the peak mileage in April. And then what's very different about the down run and the up run is that we will then, as we move towards race day, focus a little bit more on speed work. Now, I'm using, for those of you who aren't watching this but are listening, I'm putting in inverted commas, because what we want is we want to do some faster running, but not pure speed work in the terms of, because we want to strengthen you eccentrically for the downhills that are going to come in the second half of Comrades. So we'll go through a strength phase, we'll go into a peak training phase, and then we'll come into a little bit of a speed phase as we go into the race. But from a time inflection point of view, January to the end of February is your time where you really lay the foundation and slowly build up your mileage. March to April is where we build up to peak training. And then as we go into May, that becomes long run season where we do our final long run and our race preparation. And then after that long run, we're effectively into a long taper, which we'll obviously discuss in a lot of detail later on. But it'll be a gradual taper then as we move to race day.
Lindsay, that's awesome. Before we dive into the mileage and how to ramp up your mileage so that you don't do damage in the build-up to Comrades and talking some specifics, let me just take a step back. You mentioned something really important there, and that was around qualification and making sure you qualify when you're ready. And a lot of people miss this because it also relates a little bit to people who are chasing seeding. And it's not so much the marathon itself that does the damage, it's the effort of that marathon and how it impacts your training coming out of that marathon qualifier, or if it's an ultra qualifier. Won't you unpack that a little bit and the specifics of why that's so important?
Yeah, it's such a relevant point, and we will definitely go over this again because this is one of those classic mistakes that people make, and even when they've heard it, it's either that they don't want to hear it or it's just such an easy thing to forget. So we will definitely go over this again in the future. But effectively, really, once we get into March and in particular April, any big effort requires recovery from, okay? And so therefore, if you do a hard marathon in that period of time, you have to recover from the effort. That compromises your training. But what's worse is that most people are too scared to let themselves recover because they don't want to compromise their training. And so that's also when we pick up injury. So you've got both sides of the coin. Number one, we have to recognize the effort. So if you try and qualify in Feb, but you're not ready, now you have to try and qualify again. And the people that are trying to qualify don't have the luxury of running a qualifier easy. Okay, so if you're a silver medal runner and for whatever reason you started training late, you know what you're capable of, you can go and qualify in April with a 3:10, 3:15 marathon, and you get out of that and it's a slightly too hard training run. But if you're a 4:50 qualifier, you're on the margin, then going for it in February means you probably can't go for it again until late March. But then when you go for it in late March, you are going to then compromise your training. So rather push that out by 3-4 weeks so that when you do it, you make sure that you do it. Then we take the recovery from that. And again, those marginal qualifiers are always going to have to make compromises along the way. But those compromises are what going to allow you to arrive at the start line injury-free. And for anybody that's been in and around Coach Parry at all, you know that that's our number one tagline is like, do not get injured. And we know from research that 68% of the runners who do not finish Comrades started with an injury. So if you are going to have to qualify late for whatever reason, you want to make sure that you recover properly, because the bigger threat to your not finishing Comrades is getting injured rather than the training that you miss. And then just to wrap that up around the chasing the seeding, because the theme is similar, is that if you run a hard marathon in March and in particular in April, you are going to compromise your training. Now, moving up a seeding batch is going to get you 2 minutes on race day. It's very unlikely you're going to move 2 seeding batches up. So most people are trying to get 1 seeding batch ahead, and they're going to score 2 minutes on race day by being 1 seeding batch further forward. But if they just forgot about the seeding, applied themselves to training, did what they needed to do, got to the race line fit, fresh and tapered, you can actually be 10, 15, 20 minutes better than you were when you ran that qualifying race. But if you haven't been able to do the training, you're actually going to lose that potential 10, 15, 20 minutes. And that's the reason why you don't want to keep trying to qualify or keep chasing seeding to get further forward on race morning.
Yeah, absolutely. Lindsay, that is superb. Before we chat mileage, I actually forgot to do it at the top of the podcast, but we've been getting some great feedback on these podcasts on various platforms, like on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And we don't do this often, but I think I'm going to do it today. So we've had a whole bunch of Coach Parry caps made. We were actually selling these at the Expo at the Cape Town Marathon. We're going to be selling them at Comrades as well. So we're actually going to send one. Sarah Hutton left us a really nice 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. So we're going to Sandra, we're going to send you a really nice Coach Parry cap. So thank you very much for doing that. Really do appreciate it. And thanks also to everyone else who left us some great feedback on those various platforms. Let's talk mileage, Lindsay. And before we talk about specific numbers, because that is, I think, a lot of the talk is like how many kilometers or miles should we be doing from the 1st of January right through to Comrades Race Day. Before we talk about those specific numbers, let's talk about the importance of ramping up your mileage sensibly between now and Comrades Race Day and how best to go about it.
Yeah, so look, we've got some nice standard formulas that people talk about around, not increasing mileage by more than 10%. That's your lowest risk injury. And look, that works really well, especially if you're starting from zero. If you've been training properly over a long period of time, you can actually ramp that up a little bit quicker and it'll still be safe. But that's really the key to what I want to talk about now, is that we don't want to ramp up quickly early on in the year because it leaves us nowhere to go to once we get to actual Comrades training. And maybe I didn't stress that enough in the overview. I spoke about building up to peak mileage from the 1st of March, but that for me is Comrades season. Comrades season starts on 1 March, and that build up carries on until you peak out around about the 6th to the 13th of May, depending on which medal you're training for. That's where you peak out. Now, you can just think that if you're going to train really hard from now until then, you're obviously going to be burnt out, sick, injured, tired. Certainly, best case scenario is going to be like, geez, I just can't wait for Comrades to come because I'm so sick of all this training. And so you're going in already mentally compromised. Okay, so that is the crucial key, and why when we spoke at the start of the podcast, we were talking about building up slowly. And that is really what we want to do. So 1st of January, we want to be getting consistent. So the most important aspect of January's training is to dial in the consistency, to start the strength training, which we'll tackle in, I think, the next podcast, to get your routine sorted so that you've got your discipline going for Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, Sunday, or whatever the days are that week that work for you. But that is what January is about. It's laying down the foundation for the consistency to get yourself going. Even for the silver medal guys that we always joke don't have friends and family and that are going to do hundreds of kilometers when they get into peak training. Even for those guys, if you're around the 50 to 60K a week mark, don't even sweat it. You'll just do a very gradual and steady build up. And if you add 5 to 10Ks per week on that with recovery weeks, you'll see you'll get to plenty mileage by the time you get to April and May. So as we go down through the medals, the targets will be slightly less. But effectively, for people who want to finish Comrades and do fairly well, we're probably looking to be somewhere in the 30 to 40 kilometers per week now at the start of January. And you'll want to be around about the 40, 45 kilometer per week mark by the end of January. If you want to get a bronze medal, that's probably sneaking closer to the 50K. You want to get a Robert Machali, 55, maybe 60. Bill Roans are around about that 60 mark, and probably ideal for silvers is somewhere around 65 to 70 Ks. And of course, that does imply that you have already qualified. So that was the high road that we spoke about. Obviously, if you have to have a marathon, then what I would look to do is to try and plan your marathon at the earliest around the 18th of Feb. But if you have been training well through December, that could possibly be a little bit earlier. And that window is up until the first weekend of March. So that's your kind of ideal window. Gives you enough time from now to build up to a marathon. And you'd obviously need to start with a bit more mileage now and be training specifically to a marathon. But the difference between the two groups will be this, is that the group that's qualified can build up nice and slowly and carry on building into March. The group that needs to train for a marathon will build up their mileage a little bit quicker and build up to a marathon, but then they will recover. They will give themselves minimum 1 week, preferably 2, to recover properly from that marathon effort. And then because you are fit, but now recovered, you can then jump into that Comrades plans, let's call it halfway through March. And actually your training won't have been compromised. So there's no need to panic and no need to catch up. But from that point on, you can then plug in and play. Obviously, the later you push out that marathon, the more you have to kind of individualize that recovery. So it will possibly come down to a week, but you've got to make sure that the week is enough. So you've really got to monitor recovery. When's the last day that you saw? How's your sleeping going? How are you generally feeling before you just leap straight into a Comrades plan, and try and then stay with it till the next round.
Lindsay, that is superb. And it makes me, I mean, before we get into like how many kilometers ballpark between, like if you add it all up, I know you've given us the averages per week, but you're on Strava, I'm on Strava. I've seen some people doing silly mileage already. What happens if you are a Vic Clapham candidate and you are way above those numbers that you should be looking at now? Like you are almost what you're talking about, peak training, you're doing that in January. Should you back off? Do you keep doing what you're doing? What's the best way to approach that? If you're over 50 and want to recover from sessions faster, run pain and injury-free, and improve your endurance, then be sure to join Lindsay and I for our upcoming Faster Beyond 50 Masterclass. In it, we'll show you how we helped a 70-year-old run a 47-minute, 18-second 10K and how you can take those exact same principles and apply them in your training. Simply scan the QR code that's on screen right now or click on the link in the description below to save your seat in the training now. We look forward to seeing you there.
Yeah, so look, if we think about it like investing, you can go for some wildcat investments and it might feel amazing as they come off early. But what happens if the market crashes? Then you're left with nothing and you've got no money. And that's essentially what happens now. So if you're going for a Vic Clapham, and in particular, if it's your first Comrades and your goal is just to finish, but you're looking at all the people around you that are doing much more and they're much more experienced runners and they're going on for their 6th, 7th, 8th, 13th, 14th, 15th, whatever the number might be, Comrades, or you get into the mindset of, oh yeah, but if I train for a bronze, then I'm guaranteed of getting all of those things inflate what you are capable of. And now you only have to stand at the start of any race to have a look around you and see that we are not all built the same. The guys at the front weigh between 46 and 52 kilograms. That's why they can run 200 plus kilometers a week. That actual physical stress on their muscles, joints, and bones is that much less than what ours are. Genetically, what's happening inside their bodies is totally different to what's happening to us. And so if you just look around you, we are not all built equally for the task of running. And if you are an 11:45 runner, then your body's not going to handle what a 10:45 runner can handle, what a 9.5 hour runner can handle. So really, what's the consequence, you ask me? Well, the best case consequence is that you just get burnt out mentally and really fatigued and are forced to rest a little, or you just really don't enjoy the process. So yes, you finish and you get your Comrades, but actually it was just a terrible process. So that's your best case scenario. That doesn't sound like such a good best case scenario for me. But what's probably going to happen is that you're going to get sick or injured at some points in time. And we know runners, one of my very close friends, this part's not funny. I mean, he had a bad fall and broke his wrist, and then he found out a few weeks later that it wasn't just his wrist that it broke. He'd actually broken his elbow, And the doctor that put him into a soft cast for the elbow said to him, look, I'm not going to waste my breath. You're a runner, so I'm not going to waste my breath and tell you not to run, because I know you're not going to listen to me, but you'll be doing yourself a huge favor if you just at least don't run for the next 2 weeks. Okay. So that's the mentality of runners. We're going to get injured, and then we're going to be like, I only have to get through a few more weeks of training, or I can't just sit here and watch everyone else training because I'm falling behind. And so then we try and train with an injury and it gets worse. And that's your biggest risk for not finishing, as I've already said earlier in this podcast. Starting Comrades with an injury is fatal. That's what stops you from not finishing Comrades. So your best case scenario is that you just really hate the process. Your second best scenario is that you get injured, have a compromised process, don't achieve your goal of finishing Comrades, either because you can't train properly or because you start with an injury. And your worst case scenario is that you don't even get to line up and experience the atmosphere at Comrades, because you don't even get there, because you are ruined with a stress fracture when you get to April.
Yeah, I had a quiet chuckle to myself there, Lindsay, where you were talking about if we're standing on the start line of races and you look around and you see the different body types, and obviously the guys in the front weigh like mid-40s to early 50 kgs, and then the further back you go. And it reminded me of my first Comrades years ago. Stephen Muzingi won that year, and I ended up bumping to him at the finish, and this was at the Oval, the old finish at the Oval in Pietermaritzburg. And I bumped into him at the finish afterwards, and somebody said, "Oh, this is Stephen. He won it. This is great." So we had a quick chat, and he looked at me, and I mean, if anybody's seen me in real life, I mean, on the internet, Lindsay and I look the same size, but I'm a lot taller in real life than on YouTube. And he said to me, "Man alive," he said, "You like big for a runner. Like, that's amazing." He asked me how much I weighed, and then I asked him how much he weighed. And on race day, he weighed 46 kgs, I think it was back then. And then I did the math, and I was like, I weighed 3 times what he did. And I was like, that is ridiculous. I should get 3 times the amount of time that he got. So he ran like a 5:20 odd. I should get close on 16 hours in to finish Comrades. And because I finished under 12 hours, like if that was a handicap race, I should have won the race in theory. I think we need to lobby the new board. We need a handicap race for Comrades, and we do it by weight. So we weigh the winner, and then we work it out for everybody as they get further back. And yeah, I think I'd have a good chance of winning Comrades, to be honest. But that's just a total aside. Lindsay, let's talk about the big number that everybody wants to know. And this always gets talked about. And people go, well, between the 1st of January and Comrades race day, you need to do X amount of kilometers. And years ago, I remember when my dad was running Comrades, and it was probably the same for yours, where people used to say you need to do between 1st of January, Comrades race day, you need to do 2,000 Ks or whatever it is. Let's talk about, I mean, you've spoken about the averages, but what is the ballpark we're aiming for? And obviously it's going to be different, like you said, for somebody who's training for a silver versus somebody who's training for a Vic Clapham, as an example.
Yeah, so let's start out with the Vic Clapham. So if you want to finish Comrades, you're looking at around 800 to 850 on the low end, and you're looking at just under 1,000 or onto 1,000 on the high end. So that's what you want to do. I'm going to just quickly do an exercise with you on my trusty calculator and go, right, we've got effectively 6, so it's going to be slightly rudimentary, but we've got effectively 6 months from today to get to race day. So that tells us we've got 24 weeks, okay? 24 weeks, and if we need to do a maximum of 1,000 Ks, we divide that by 24. That means that what we want to average per week from now to race day is 41.6. So let's call it 40 Ks. 40 Ks a week between now and race day will give you enough mileage to finish this race, okay? And so when you look at that as your big picture, don't panic about the big numbers that people are putting up now. So for a Vic Clapham, that's kind of what you're looking at as your stock weeks are going to be in the region of 35 to 45 kilometers, okay? As we get into peak training now. It doesn't even have to quite be there now. And then we're going to intersperse those with some slightly bigger weeks. You're going to do a marathon in one of those. Then we're going to recover from that marathon. So those will be lower weeks. So it'll pull your average down a little bit. Then we're going to build up, and we're probably going to do a ultra or another marathoners training. So that's going to be another big week. Okay. And then we're going to go back to our stock weeks for a while, and then we're going to do the Comrades long run, which will be a huge week. I mean, it'll almost be double what you've ever done before. We recover from that effort again, and then we'll get back into our stock weeks and then a taper. So when we put all those things together, most of our weeks are going to be in the 40s, and then a couple of weeks that might go close to 80, some just over 80, because there's going to be one really big hit in that week. Okay, so that's how you'll look at it from a Vic Clapham point of view. For your bronze, you're looking at sort of 1,000, 1,200, 1,300. For your Robert Machali, you're looking at 1,200 to 1,400, maybe 1,500, but that's starting to get on the really high end. For your Bill Roans, you're looking at 1,500, 1,600 kilometers between now and the 1st of January. And for the silvers, you're looking at 2,000 plus. So that gives you an idea of how many kilometers you need to run between now and Comrades. And I know as you sit there listening, you're going, forget about it, can't happen. But we just see it again and again and again and again. And guys, this is my 17th rodeo at Comrades. So I'm really not making this stuff up. It's really, if you want to have an injury-free, feel good, enjoy the process, and have a great day out on race day, those are the numbers. Block out the noise from people who've done multiple Comrades, that have got stronger bodies than you, that are probably overtraining themselves. So forget about the fact that maybe they can handle more, but the reality is they could probably do better on slightly less.
Yeah, I wanted to add that, Lindsay, and you just did it, was especially the novices. You new in the club, you want to soak up as much information as you can and learn from as many people as you can. But as this ramps up towards Comrades Race Day, the noise just becomes more and more and more, and particularly around mileage and chasing specific numbers. You are not going to do yourself any favors by trying to chase the same amount of numbers as someone in your club that's potentially run 20, 25 Comrades. They're probably a better runner than you are, biomechanically more suited to running than you are, and trying to chase those same numbers. You're just looking for trouble, and there's a good chance that you're going to end up, as Lindsay said, injured, and worst case scenario, not even making it to Comrades Race Day. So Linz, I think that was awesome. Great brand new start to the year. We're back again next week. Please make sure that you do subscribe to this podcast, whatever podcast you listen, podcast player you listen on. If you're on Spotify, if you're on Apple Podcasts, or whatever it is, just make sure you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any of the upcoming episodes that we put out. If you're watching this on YouTube, please hit the subscribe button. Also, make sure you hit the notification bell so that you don't miss them, all right? We're going to be popping them out every single week. We're going to be with you between now and race day every single week to guide you along this process. If you need training plans or ongoing assistance, make sure you check out coachparry.com. I'll pop a link into the description. You can grab yourself a training plan. You can also get access to our coaches on a day-to-day basis, live strength training classes to make sure you do the strength training that's most beneficial to you, because that's exactly what we are going to be talking about on next week's episode of Down. From myself, Brad Nadalt, and the coach, Lindsay Parry, thank you so much for listening, and we look forward to catching up again soon. Cheers, everyone. Bye-bye.
Cheers.